My mother is a dressmaker, and many of my memories of her are intertwined with the fabrics and garments she makes. I remember her surrounded by a froth of white. She had a wedding deadline and couldn't stop for a fractious child home from school. So I sat at her feet and she would hand me a scrap of silk and spin tales like Scheherazade of tiny silkworms and medieval travellers on the long and dusty Silk Road, of emerald green velvet woven on giant looms with their multiple threads rising like spiderwebs, Irish lace makers tatting in doorways and twisting ribbon lace from France, tartans of Scotland, embroidery, tapestry, divers from Japan searching for oyster shell to make pearl buttons, the impact of the portable Singer sewing machine and how it helped so many women rise out of poverty. So I've known that fabrics bind stories within their weft and warp from an early age, and that's where the If Fabrics Could Speak project began. So I asked, if your fabric could speak, what story would it tell? A story of family, culture, or making? What memories are woven and threaded through the fabrics you treasure?
Okay. My grandma's and her children, they lived in like just squatter area, scattered off like along the valley, along the hills, and no sanitation, not much shelter. In terms of like, it's just a hut, you know, if there's a typhoon, you know, water can come. But when finally the government decided to demolish everything, so they got this chance to move into like apartments, and so they bought a sofa, they had like custom-made cupboards, and they also custom-made some cushions. And I've never really seen cushions, you know, at that age. Oh, you have cushions! We have a sofa, like that's how amazing it was when like, I was in primary school. That's amazing. Like, so that's why I do remember like this is like the era that the change in like your life, that you can have such huge improvements just having cushions. So I actually framed it and put it on my wall. So this is like, I looked at it every morning.
This is a story of a very special tablecloth made by my mother, Florence. It's a tablecloth of signatures of visitors who came to our house for afternoon tea or a meal. After they signed the tablecloth, she embroidered them over a period of about 20 years, and I believe there's about 300 different signatures on this cloth. There are people from all over the world. I've counted up at least 18 different countries. It's quite a United Nations collection of countries, really, and of course a lot of the African countries no longer exist with the name that's, you know, on the tablecloth. There's a variety of people, nobody famous. As children, my brother and I were not allowed to sign it. We were quite keen to add our signatures, but Mum said, no, it's only for visitors. I'm not an embroiderer myself, so I can't even sneak it on now. Most of the people on this tablecloth are no longer alive. The ones who are still alive are all in the UK anyway, and I'm in Australia now, so it's a bit of a memory cloth.
Well, my name is Jude, and this fabulous 1940s handmade dress was made by my grandmother, Lydia Parry. The Russian army was advancing on Tallinn, so that's the capital of Estonia. I believe she was 22. The stories that I've been told that she only had half an hour to decide whether to stay with her family or pack one suitcase and get on a boat to Germany. The rest of her family stayed. Her mother and her sister survived the war and the invasion. Sadly, her brother did not. While she was in Germany, she discovered that people who were married were being favoured as two strangers that met in a war-torn situation, and they stayed married until the day he died, 50 or 60 years of marriage. My grandmother was the hostess with the mostess, and she was a brilliant seamstress. She made this dress for dancing. Dancing in her new country, dancing as a celebration. Every time I see her in this dress, she's got the biggest smile and she's dancing. I myself have worn it, and then when I could no longer wear the dress, I've actually passed it down to my niece Isabel, who has also worn the dress. So that's 3 generations of us so far, and it's still holding in there. There's a little bit of wear and tear, but it still looks pretty good. A 1940s girl that's had a good time.
As I've lost connection with my heritage, we don't know where our mob is, and although we live on the east coast with a stolen generation, it could be anywhere. And this word is something that I hold on to from my heritage. Oh, whistling. Well, it's one of the words my mother used to use when we were children, and she would tell us not to wuzzle our clothes, and we had to make sure our skirts and dresses were perfect and pristine. And if we wuzzled them, which was you're just moving them in your fingers, would scrunch up the material, and it might, you know, have a crushed look instead of looking pristine and ironed, which she would make sure we would look very presentable type thing. So as far as the word is, we think it's from our Aboriginal heritage, because no one else used to use the word but Mum and her family. And over the years, you know, like I want to be very proud of where we've come from, and I want my elders to know that it's important that they know I'm proud.
I got this when I was 17, but you'll see quite a lot of damage in the form of wear, but the location of the damage is significant. So in martial arts, there is no fast path. You know, talking about, you know, I have a tear on my cuff and on my hip because of thousands of hours of this retraction. So where I have done some repairs, I still want to sort of show these battle scars, such as they are, but in a way that enhances and doesn't diminish it. So I've opted for a bright pink thread and a pretty rough kind of stitch. So it's not meant to look pretty. It's meant to still show it there, but not so much to take that story away. Do just enough to hold it together. This is when I feel the most comfortable in my body, is when I'm put this on and it takes me into a completely different headspace. More so than certificates I might hang on my wall, more so than belts, this is the thing that actually shows my martial arts journey, and that's why I keep it.
Well, I'm going to start back with when I learnt to sew. I learnt to do a nice fine hem and stitch it on the treadle sewing machine. I was probably about 10. It's been to New Guinea and back, and it's been to Sydney and back. I've had many other tea times. It's holy, but it's done a really good, it's had a really good, interesting life, I think. I'll go on to this cushion, which at another time in my life, when I went to learn how to use computers at Marden Senior College, The only way I could stay there was to do my SACE. A lot of people enrolled to do that. Most of them only did the textile arts and didn't follow through with their research project to get their SACE, but I decided I was going to do the lot. So I was just at my 69th birthday that I got my certificate that I'd passed the SACE. So that's pretty special to me.
大家好，我叫安琪儿，我来自中国内蒙古。我的家乡在外蒙古和内蒙古的边界上。内蒙古的纺织物中，哈达是最著名的，它代表着蒙古文化。当人们踏上征程的时候，亲朋好友会为他献上一条哈达，祝他一路顺风，一路平安。丝绸呢，是中国纺织文化中最传统，也是最重要的一部分。丝绸呢，用于像旗袍等等这样传统的中国服饰中，但是大家呢不知道，像丝绸中这些盘扣，它有什么样的寓意呢？在远古时期，在文字还没有发明之前，这些中国的结盘扣，它是一种语言，用来沟通、交流、记事的。现在呢，这些中国结盘扣同样有着不同的寓意。比如说，在新娘结婚时穿的礼服上，这种中国结盘扣就寓意着团结、忠诚和美好的婚姻，祝她婚姻幸福、美满、吉祥。OK，
My inheritance has all come in traditional Ukrainian clothing. And I was talking with my sister on the way here, and I was like, you know, I'm bringing Baba's khustka, you know, the white one. She goes, ooh, yeah. Khustka is a name for this, really, a scarf. Every piece of fabric is from where they were in Ukraine, and it's made of wool, and it's so thin and clearly dyed by hand, where the dyes are slowly bleeding over time, and these slow little holes are starting to come into it, and a machine can't do what a human can do. All of them have blessings and wishes woven into them. Everything is alive in my world, and I recognize that not everybody sees it that way. It's like a friend leaving an old friend behind and having to decide which one, and knowing, like, okay, I need to take a few things of Baba Olya with me. You know, Baba Olya is my father's mother, but they are alone and in a closet and seemingly forgotten. And that doesn't quite feel right, given how much time and energy Baba and all of those women who have made these these prayers are locked away, and that it's a tether between me and Canada, but it's also a tether between me and Ukraine. And yeah, it was very precious. Even pulling it out today, it was like, ooh, I don't know. You know, like from its safe little spot with the lavender in between, and, you know, pulling it out. And yeah, it's one of the last kind of connections I have to her.
So the piece I brought to share with you today is actually started by my great-grandmother, and my mother and I never knew this existed until we were visiting my grandmother's unit one time probably in the 1990s, and Nana came out with at that stage, probably a third to a half finished embroidery piece, and you can probably see it was completed in a gorgeous sateen finished thread, but it was only partially finished, so a tiny bit of the border, sort of just one of the flowers. Don't know what the initial project was for, unfortunately, but just that Elsie May had worked on it, and then I completed the piece. So I must have been in my late teens when I did that. So you can definitely see the point of difference, which is, it's quite nice in a way that you can see the original and then the pieces that I added in later. A bit nerve-wracking to be completing a piece that was you know, had a lot of personal value to Mum and Nana and I. So last night when I unfurled it to bring here, I showed it to my 12-year-old son who hadn't seen it before and told him the story, and he was really excited.
I made the skirt I'm wearing. I've made pretty much most of my clothes, all my dresses. I've made some 1940s jumpers with the sleeves that go up to here and the puffy sleeves. I can be so much more comfortable going about my day. I don't have to worry about, you know, having the painful tag on the back, or like the little bit of plastic that gets overlocked into shoulder seams. I can just be, and then also like dressing up in vintagey sort of style clothes. It kind of feels like you're putting on a costume, and you get a bit more confident because you're like, well, I'm this fancy 1940s lady now, not just boring old Sadafri. It's something to talk about as, oh, that's a nice top you're wearing. I'm like, well, I made it. Do you want to hear all about it? It just makes so many little parts of my life easier, and they all kind of stack on top of each other. So I'm making stuff slowly by hand when I'm really overwhelmed, or when I can barely get out of bed. Often like something simple like hand sewing and knitting. They're things I can still do with very little brain space. That's pretty much the only thing getting me through the day some days.
I'm holding the christening robe that my mother made for my eldest child to wear. My mum was really all about simplicity when it came to clothing. Not only simplicity, but beautiful fabrics, and how can I get it done in the quickest time? Mum was a busy woman, 5 children, mother-in-law, husband, life. The time was always of the essence. So she made a simple garment, but it's got lots of heritage. The story is actually more about the fabric. So this piece of material, which is a fine muslin, was part of Miss Wilkins' trousseau. Miss Wilkins never married, and so this is a bit of a story about how, even though she didn't have children of her own, generations beneath her in other people's families are connected to her.
Discovering weaving was a very soothing place of peace, and everything else would just drift away. It was a form of painting, but more 3D, and just loving the blend of colours and slowly making my way along the warp. I don't even remember the name of the pattern. And the chair has lived on through 4 sons, my granddaughter and my little grandson. It is beginning to wear out. It's had lots of use, lots of love. Lots of lullabies sung, lots of stories read. So the one on my right, this is a wrap, a shawl. This is one of the last that I wove, and it hasn't been used. It awaits its right home.
So we're here to present our chuppah project that was a labor of love and inspiration. I call us the Benot chuppah, which is the sisters of the chuppah. That's what we became through this process. We know each other, but much better now after we've done this. So the chuppah itself is it's a wedding canopy that brides and grooms stand underneath when they get married in the Jewish faith. We would put a call out to the community to see if there was any fabrics, mostly related to their wedding, that they would like to put into this project as well. We got her dress, my dress, and then someone also who has been hoarding lace for years. Where do we start? We've got this fabric. So we deconstructed the dresses, and then we just sat around and had a play.
And we wanted to do justice to all the different pieces of fabric. So we had this amazing time of cutting things around. Sylvia, who's not here, would say, oh, well, look, I'll take that home and I'll cut around the edges. And then
we placed and then placed again. Then
we'd stitch and stitch and stitch and stitch and stitch.
know the origin of every piece
You do,
of fabric.
yeah, you do. The centre is like the centre of the huppah. We have a very discreet and subtle Star of David. For me, it's really important that all the textiles that are done in religious communities have always been done by anonymous people. There's no name to them, and there shouldn't be.
Another way to get married, if you don't have a fancy huppah, is to use a talit, which is a prayer shawl. So what we did was put a talit on the back so that you get married under a talit as well.
As well.
We talked about how sometimes the fabric and the story are together, and sometimes the story exists and the fabric is lost. When you spoke about it to me, you lit up. You treasured that fabric. I could see you describe it with your hands, and you even wrapped yourself in it with your hands. And so I knew that that was a very important fabric to you. So even though the fabric isn't there, the story is still really important. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect description of nostalgia, you know, that feeling something when you think back to it. When something's lost, the actual thing is lost, you don't have it anymore, but the feeling is the same. The memory of that time is the same. I was about 7 at that time, or 6, and my parents went through a divorce, and that meant, you know, my mum had to take me and all the children, there was 3 of us, and we had to go live at our nana's house, and we had to stay there. So we were going through actually a very hard time, a hard experience at that time. But I didn't know, you know, you're a kid, you just keep going on. And my nana taught me knitting. And I used to watch my nana with the different fabrics and different clothes and, you know, even these pants. I'm still obsessed with texture. I love texture, even of this couch that I'm sitting on. And then, so my nana taught me to knit. And it started with just, you know, string and really basic things, and we were doing little squares, and I was so excited. I got fascinated with that world of texture and knitting and being with my nana. And I said to my brother, why don't you try this as well? You should try this as well. We'll make some squares. Here's the string, and we would make these little squares, and each of us would make a little square. And it became all of the family. We would sit in the family room on the couch, and we would have different kind of yarns, different colours and textures. And thicknesses. Some would be very small, some would be very kind of chunky knits or thick knits. And so some of the squares were small, some were big. There was a lot of variation in the squares, depending on what you liked or preferred at the time. And it became like a full family activity. And I remember the texture, I remember what it felt like. I remember it was a real bonding experience making these squares. It was like therapy. You know, it was a way for us to be together and to bond and talk to each other and express ourselves and laugh together. In the end, we went through about 2 years of knitting these squares together. And it wasn't like, you know, we were knitting fast with a purpose. It was more a therapy, a gradual process of coming together again and bonding again. And, you know, we would go and do our own thing, and then we'd come back together and knit these squares. And it was like all of our emotions and our love and our feelings, our pain as well, everything from the experience of the divorce, our frustrations and our sadness was going into these squares. So when we were done with knitting the many, many squares, Nana sewed them all together. And I felt like that, the same as we'd referred to before, it was very representative of the family bonding and coming together, going through a hard time but still being together. And Nana as the matriarch being able to sew it all together. It was very cute to watch, but it was a really, you know, enriching experience. And we had this big blanket, it was so warm and so heavy, and we each had contributed to that blanket. All of our feelings were different about the situation. All the textures were different on the blanket. How we all contributed was different. Some things were harder, some things were softer, some things were, you know, and we could, when you put it around you could feel the love through the warmth of the blanket. And that's my most amazing memory of that time. I don't have the blanket here with me at the moment, but the memory, the nostalgia of that blanket is very present in my heart.
You were literally knitting your family back together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it felt like that. At that time, I didn't realise I was just a kid, you know, but now looking back, I'm older and I'm like, that's absolutely what we were doing. Finding the bond again, you know, through each thread, joining ourselves back together so that we could have the strength to carry on.
He stopped, I ran in, I grabbed 2 balls of wool and a crochet hook, and I hadn't crocheted since I was 11.
Yeah.
Of course I'm left-handed and no one wanted to teach me. So I came out and I started crocheting this little rug, and Cassie said, "Oh Mum, that can be for me dolly." So I thought, great. So finished the 2 balls of wool, and she said, "Oh Mum, if you keep going, that can be a rug for me." So I made the bigger rug, and she still has it now, but as she was getting a little bit older and would go to sleepovers, I didn't know that she was folding that up and tucking that in her pillow slip. And she said, "I never got frightened while I was away, Mum, because you were with me." Isn't that amazing?
I taught myself to crochet because I grew up surrounded by creativity. My nana taught me to bake, my nonna taught me how to sew and knit. I cooked with my dad, my mum taught me how to craft and music, a family friend taught me to paint, and I wanted something that was my own. Something that I could teach myself, and all the creations would be from my own doing, and it has really been an amazing experience. When you teach yourself, you're able to go at your own speed. You can challenge yourself as much as you're ready to do, and it's an experience learning to push yourself, try that next little step to learn that new stitch, and to keep going even when you've messed up that one row 5 times, and just the persistence you learn, and it's all self-driven. Making is important to me because it's something that my family's always done. We've always done things from scratch, but I really enjoy it because it's a place where I feel relaxed.